Good evening and welcome to Vital Teams Team Leadership Essentials. My name is Miguel Escobar and I serve as the Managing Program Director here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy weeks and busy schedules, especially at this particularly busy time of the year, to attend tonight's event. We have people from many different parts of the Episcopal Church and beyond joining us. And if you haven't already, please type into the chat box where you are joining us from tonight. The chat box is on the right-hand corner of the screen. I would just like to say a few words about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is, and then also what the Vital Teams is. The Episcopal Church Foundation is an independent, lay-led organization whose mission is to strengthen the strategic, leadership, and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other institutions in our church. If you haven't already, I'd invite you to check out our website at www.episcopalfoundation.org and also our publication, Vital Practices, at ecfvp.org. We provide a variety of different services and we have a variety of programs, but tonight's program is especially focused on a pilot initiative that we've been developing since 2014 with the leadership and support of Ron Bird, who is our main presenter tonight, called Vital Teams. And Vital Teams has three goals. First of all, we want to develop a training for lay and clergy leadership teams across the Episcopal Church, one that strengthens the effectiveness of these teams. We want to partner with seminaries and other leadership formation institutions to get leadership, especially collaborative leadership skills, into the heart and curriculum of our seminaries. And we want to create a set of tools for helping communities of faith identify collaborative leaders. So obviously, tonight's presentation is really focusing on bullet point 1, which is our training. And so with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Ron Bird.
Thank you, Miguel. Good evening, all. And again, just to reiterate what Miguel said, thank you all for joining us tonight and taking time away from your schedule to discuss this very important topic in our church. I just want to start by introducing our Vital Team. My role with the Vital Teams program, I serve as lead consultant to Miguel, who is the managing program director. Prior to coming to ECF, and currently I serve as rector of a small parish in mid-Michigan, St. Catharines in mid-Michigan. And I believe that part of my work, or coming to Vital Teams, there you are, Peter, I see you, buddy, was the work that we have been able to accomplish at St. Catharines by building very strong teams. And the best example of that is the work that we did to bring about an adult day center for seniors with dementia and other disabilities. What's important about the work that we did there was we brought together various members from the congregation with very specific skills to develop this day program that's been running now for 3 years, that runs Monday through Friday from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30. Prior to coming to St. Catharines in ministry, I served for nearly 20 years as an executive manager in various Fortune 500 companies. So I bring some of that skill both to my ministry as well as to this program we're calling Vital Teams. The second person on our team is Kate Adams. She serves as a special project director here for ECF, and Kate is particularly involved in new programs initiatives. Prior to coming to ECF, Kate served as vice president for the church pension group, both in their strategy and service development group. Kate has over 40 years of experience in financial and resource development for diverse nonprofit institutions. And just a bit more about Miguel. Some of you may know, but prior to coming to ECF, Miguel served as the communications assistant to the Most Reverend Catholic Jeffrey Soares. Miguel has came over to ECF in 2010, and Miguel is responsible for ECF Vital Practices, the Fellowship Partner Programs, Vestry Resource Guide, and coordinating ECF educational events, and serves as our team leader for Vital Teams. Again, I just want to take a moment. If you have just come on and have not had an opportunity, please do type your name and your location in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. I'd like to start this evening with prayer. And some of what we will do tonight as we go through this presentation are things that we very much practice in our group, on our Vital Teams. And some of these things I will encourage you also to pick up as we go through the presentation. So the first thing is prayer. So I'd like for us to say the prayer on the screen together, if that's possible. If everybody can see the prayer on the screen, okay. Let's begin. Let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too pleased with ourselves, when our dreams are true, because we dream too little, when we arrive safely because we sail too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life, have fallen in love with life. We have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, with storms will show your majesty. We're losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push back the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. This we ask in the name of our captain, who is Jesus Christ. Thank you all for that. Let's jump right into the presentation. Tonight I hope to cover these areas that you see on the screen. We're going to talk a little bit about the various types of Vital Teams that we're speaking about. We'll spend just an overview on parts of our 101 curriculum, which includes the 3 essential ingredients for Vital Teams: strong relationships, identifying clear processes, and focusing on results. And then we're going to talk about a few next steps, and at the end of this presentation tonight, I have identified a few resources that I think might help you in some areas, particularly in regard to communication skills. So we'll take a little bit of that, a look at that towards the end of our presentation. What do we mean when we're talking about Vital Teams? On your screen, these are just 5 teams that came to mind that we've been able to identify. We're talking about vestries. Vestries are Vital Teams to a parish. Many of you are familiar with bishops' committees in mission churches. Oversight committees. When I speak of oversight committees, these are typically planning committees that are represented by the various organizations in the church, the leadership team in the church, and board of directors. Are there other teams? When I mention these Vital Teams, are there teams that come to mind to any of you that are participating tonight that perhaps we may want to identify?
And if you have an idea, please enter that into the chat box on the lower right-hand side of the screen.
Stewardship team, Peter. Yes, the stewardship team is an important and certainly a Vital Team. As I was thinking about this presentation, I was thinking about also when we talk about vestries, would any of you like to share with the rest of the group tonight how you recruit vestry members? This is always a challenge, particularly in small congregations, to recruit vestry meetings, vestry team members. And when you're putting together a Vital Team, this whole process is very important in terms of who you're selecting or who you're inviting into the process. So I'm just wondering if any of you would like to share any ideas in terms of recruiting new vestry members. And particularly as we come to that time of year when we're starting to look for vestry members into the new calendar year. I'll wait a minute because there are multiple attendees typing. Peter has identified perhaps using job descriptions, multiple conversations, and identifying clear expectations. Richard, using some of the criteria certainly from ECF materials, particularly in terms of the vestry guide. Sandy, I think this is one that I haven't tried, Sandy. Invite new members by personal invitation, even before they actually agree to come on the vestry, to maybe come to a vestry meeting and see what that role is like. And Sandy and Richard are typing as well. But as many of you know, it's always a struggle oftentimes to identify new members, but also to bring the right fit, the right skill set onto the vestry. A vestry candidate agreement. How interesting, Sandy. Very good. Richard is talking about there, I believe, the dual warding approach, where there's really not a senior warden or a junior warden. They both are just the wardens of the church. The vestry covenant that was created each year at the retreat. But these are good, and thank you so much for your input. All of this sharing will help us all as we move forward into 2016 and begin to put together our Vital Teams vestries. Let's just go into the 3 essential ingredients for Vital Teams. Now, there could be any number of lists that we could come up with, but as we thought about what's really important for establishing a great team, we thought about these 3 areas: strong relationships, clear processes, and focusing on results. Tonight, our webinar will just touch and give you all a glimpse of these 3 areas. We have developed a 101 curriculum for Vital Teams that really works out to be a day-and-a-half retreat-style workshop that will go into all 3 of these areas in greater detail. Tonight, I just hope to give you a 30,000-foot view of some of these areas that we will present and provide for the church in terms of a 101 curriculum. Relationships. How do we build relationships through spiritual practices? Communication styles. Peter mentioned a few moments ago retreat, and I think Sandy talked about the weekend retreats with your vestry. Process. How do we run a good meeting? How do we build an agenda? How do we move from voting to make decisions to consensus decision making? How do we chair a meeting? How do we facilitate the conversation to ensure that all of the participants are heard and involved? And finally, all of this, between relationships and clear processes, the end game is to focus on the results. How do we achieve effective results? How do we create accountability? How do we provide a loop for feedback to check in on how we're doing? So these are 3 of the major components of our 101 curriculum. Let's just talk a little bit about beginning meetings with relationship building. Particularly when a new team is forming, and all of us, for most of us, will be forming a new team later this year, certainly by January, early in the year after we have our annual meetings and have a new vestry. Even though there may be 2/3 of the vestry that's carrying over and 1/3 that is new, that creates a new team. So how do we begin? By building relationships in that first vestry meeting at the beginning of the year. Some of the ideas that I will provide for you tonight, I want to hear some of what you might think. But one idea is to ask team members to share their interests. Why did they want to be on the vestry? What's their skill set that they bring to the vestry? Perhaps along with this, you might want to talk about and share with the entire team how long they have been a part of the parish and participating in the parish. Another ideal may be to ask participants to share, or team members of the vestry to share what's inspiring to them at the church or in their organization. You know, what gets them excited at St. Swithin's. Sometimes I even ask participants in the very beginning to share with team members their favorite ice cream, for example. That's something that, ice cream is kind of personal to me. But when participants share their ice cream with each other, I also use this technique later in a meeting perhaps when one of the members is dominating the conversation. In order to switch gears, I'll say, remember, Peter, what's your favorite ice cream again? And so that'll take you right to the next and create a break in the conversation. What are some other ideas around beginning meetings with relationship building? Any thoughts from our participants tonight? We begin with Bible study. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, Peter. A short spiritual autobiography, that's a spiritual journey. And that can certainly be asked for folks to prepare ahead of time and come into the meeting with, the initial vestry meeting. What's going on with you this week? Yeah, that's Lori, that's very good. We sometimes use a check-in for members to share what's at the top of their mind. So those are wonderful ways. Thank you for sharing those in terms of various ways to begin and to build the team and to get team members to become acquainted with each other, to begin to feel more comfortable in sharing, particularly as we move through and begin to do the work of the vestry. The next thing I want to talk about just a few minutes is what Peter and I believe Sandy brought up, is holding regular team retreats. I know some churches will have an annual team retreat. At my particular church, we have our vestry team retreats every 2 years, which really captures the majority of the vestry every 2 years. Retreats can be set aside, can be an opportunity to set aside time for planning and strategic thinking for large projects, or to look at the future of the church. But what I want to mention most in terms of strong relationships here, I want to make sure that when we do these retreats, that we set aside time for building relationships, set aside time for social time, fun activities. Recently, I was at Credo just a few weeks ago, Credo 2, and Credo, as some of you may have attended, provides for a lot of time for building relationships. One evening we played bingo together, which was a lot of fun. One evening we had an opportunity to design T-shirts using paint and crayons and other materials around relationships. So these were just a couple activities that I did just recently ago that was around building relationships at retreats. Different communication styles. What are we talking about here when we talk about communication styles? Team members will want to learn and know their fellow team members' communication styles. And I'll go back. I want to go back one step first. When I say communication styles, what comes to mind? Anybody want to share? What comes to mind when we talk about communication styles? Miscommunication, certainly. Or what about your own communication style? Personal types. Personality types, yes. I'm sorry, Rob. Myers-Briggs, certainly. Lori is typing Yes, Lori, this is where I want to go. Talker versus analyzer. Think about that for a minute. Having a talker and an analyzer in the room. On your screen right now, I've listed 3 different types of communication styles. Collaborators, contributors, directors, inquisitors. That's one group. And having all of those around the table, and how do we respond? How do we provide room for everyone to be heard and for everyone to express their ideals and concerns? That's one model. The second model you see there is controller, what Lori just spoke about, the analyzer, the promoter, the supporter. What's your communication style? Assertive, aggressive. I found this one passive aggressive, submissive, manipulative. That's a pretty crazy vestry going on there with the manipulative and the passive aggressive folks. But we all have them. We all have them. But what is your communication style, and what is the communication styles of the team members that you're leading or the team members that you are working with? Through learning each other's communication styles, we can be more effective in how we manage each other and how we manage our time together, and certainly open up spaces where people can feel comfortable and people can collaborate and engage in ministry in that way. For teams to come together, teams do 4 primary things. They form, they storm, they norm, and they perform. And so in terms of strong relationships, I think it's important to keep these 3 in mind. And there's certainly other models out there, but this is one that we're promoting. Form, we just talked about when teams come together, give an opportunity to get to know each other, and you certainly have shared some wonderful ways of doing that. And more time, of course, being spent when the team is just forming, and then allowing time as the team continues to work together. What about storm? I know we all go to these meetings. We have wonderful vestry meetings, and there's never conflict. There's just never conflict at a vestry meeting or in any of our meetings. I'm certain of that. Ha, ha, ha. Thank you, Peter. But so the question is here, for storm, what do we do? How do we manage conflict in meetings? And I'm going to open that question up for you to talk about, too. Any ideas you want to share? How do you manage? Because inevitably, any team's going to have some conflict among the members. How do you manage that? Peter is typing. Speak the truth in love. Pray for guidance, then listen. Asking questions for clarification to determine where there has been misunderstanding. Very critical. Thank you, Richard. Very critical. Lori, yes, listening is highly underrated. Tell us a little bit more, Lori, about yes, listening. Can you add a little bit to that? Yes, listening. I can tell you when we were at General Convention, one of the things that happened was it was asked that at any time during General Convention could we stop and have prayer, knowing that some of the major issues that were coming to the convention this year. That was one way that we were able to manage some conflict at General Convention. And those of you that may have watched General Convention or attended, we had wonderful prayer time, which really at different times settled the group down. Just in the middle of the convention. I'm waiting on Lori. Lori is typing in the chat box for us. Important for whomever is leading the discussion to allow everyone to express their views, even specifically asking each member to state their views. How critical is that? Lori, you're spot on there. Oftentimes we can eliminate conflict or certainly reduce conflict by just making sure everybody is heard. And also the opportunity where somebody mentioned a few moments ago we can find out through that where there is misunderstanding. And Richard speaks very well there about making sure that the quieter voices are heard. And that goes back to a previous slide when we talk about communication styles, right? By identifying and know where the quiet voices are around the table. Let's go on to norms. When we talk about norms, what are we talking about here? Ensuring that the group, as a group, understands how it will operate and function together. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'm just going to say that simple norms is establishing and asking and requesting that folks attend meetings on time may be a norm that may happen. But the group needs to come around a set of norms varying on how they will work together, because that will determine how effective and efficient the group will work together. And we have some ideas around that as well in terms of how to establish norms. And then perform. The last area, a team has to get its work done. And how do we do that? How do we ensure that there's active listening and brainstorming and that there is a clear idea among the whole team of what we're trying to accomplish? Sandy wrote, developing our norms is one of the first things we establish at the beginning of the year. They are reviewed at each meeting. Excellent, Sandy. Thank you. One thing that we recommend is that once you establish your norms, you can also put those on the wall in your meeting space. So not just the vestry have sight of those norms, but all of your teams that come together from stewardship and Altagill and the other teams can kind of use those norms as a basis for their meetings as well. But very good, Sandy. Thank you for that comment there. But norms are very important in performing. Adhere to the agenda published in advance. No surprises. All right, you're reading my mind there, Rob. We're moving on in just a second into that area. I just want to stop right here before we move on to the next part of the discussion. Any questions or comments on anything that we've covered thus far? Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you. Clear processes. So we just talked about strong relationships as the first component. The second component is clear processes. And Rob was reading my mind, because I'm going to start with talking about running an effective meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about consensus decision making and how do we as leaders and participants on a team facilitate the conversation. Building a better agenda. What makes for a good agenda? Rob just suggested there are no surprises on the agenda. I'm going to let Nancy finish typing there. And Richard. Multiple attendees. Consent agendas have changed our lives. Nancy, say a little bit more about consent agendas, because that's on my mind this evening as well. And help the rest of the team, Nancy, understand what a consent agenda is. Tell us how yours operate. It's important that the agenda be doable. I'm going to speak about that in just a few minutes, Richard. Nothing is more disabling than constantly having agendas that cannot be fulfilled. I'm going to talk about that a little bit because that's an interesting one. We would get so bogged down. This is Nancy responding to consent agendas. We would get so bogged down in minutes and financial reports that before we got to the work at hand, everybody's eyes had glazed over. We've all been there, right? With all of the technical pieces. Peter says, we try to send out supporting materials 3 to 5 days in advance. Very good. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Both Peter and Nancy. Let me just talk a little bit about that. It's very important remembering that reporting that we do at our vestries and most of our meetings is history. We're reporting on history. And by what Peter and both Nancy are suggesting is by sending those reports out ahead of time to our participants or our team members, they can review the reports ahead of time, and really there's no need to address those reports inside of the meeting unless there are concerns or that they require action by the entire team. So yes, the consent agenda, by publishing those ahead of time, just a wonderful way to respond. To get all of that out the way, the other added point of a consent agenda for typical business matters is you don't waste the paper. People can put it up on their screens at home or print at home, but you don't waste the paper in the meeting. Let's talk about how might an agenda kind of flow together, beginning with the call to order. I believe it was Richard a few moments, or maybe it was Peter a few moments ago that said that they start their vestry meetings with Bible study. Any meeting that we have should, I would believe, as Christians, as people of God coming together to discern God's word in our mission and our ministries, would start with at least prayer. Certainly, if not Bible study, Peter. What a way to begin to shape the focus of the meeting, the focus of the conversation, by picking out a particular scripture that may directly speak to the team at a particular point. The other ideal I would give to you here is perhaps evening prayer. Sandy has evening prayer up there. But what we do in our church, and in our vestry meetings, and I share this with you, is we rotate this responsibility. So each team member, over the course of a vestry calendar, have an opportunity to present some type of meditation, Bible study, poem, opening prayer for each of the vestry meetings. Again, bringing together that collaborative work. So it's not always on the rector or the cleric in the room to do this, but to invite all of the various team members at one point during the vestry calendar to lead the opening piece. And certainly even what Sandy said, lay folks can lead evening prayer. So that's another opportunity for us to do in terms of starting a meeting. How about those rectors, those warden reports? The senior warden, junior warden, those reports. Those reports are to, again, history. If the wardens can prepare those reports ahead of time and send those out, those are great. But also, I think those reports, at least the conversation, can be an opportunity for both of the wardens to speak at the beginning of the meeting. Sandy says her reports are sent out ahead of time. In recent years, and it's been a few years now, Robert Rules of Order changed the nomenclature, old business to unfinished business. And I think this is I want to speak to, I think it was Richard that brought this up a few moments ago. The reason why I like this change from old business to new business is old business gives the indication that something is past and settled. Unfinished means we still need to address it. One of the things that we recommend is what we call a rolling agenda. Put those things, all things on your agenda as they come up. Add those to the agenda. Set your time for your meeting. We're going to meet for 90 minutes. We're going to meet for 2 hours. We certainly don't recommend more than 2 hours. But you accomplish those items on your agenda as the meeting time allows. And then you roll those items on to the next meeting agenda so that you're always keeping those items that are important to the team in front of them. And you'll be surprised, oftentimes that moves pretty quickly because we'll get through some of the minor items just to get to the important items. So I want you to think about that in terms of agenda structure and what Robert Rules of Order now calls unfinished business. We already talked about team and committee reports, sending those out ahead of time, and how that might help facilitate our meetings. What about financial reports? What do we do with that treasurer's report that everybody likes to look at? What do we do with that? Well, the current thought is to move your treasurer's report to the very end of the meeting. Because, again, that's a history statement. It's what has happened. Typically, the treasurer is reporting on what has happened. Again, it's a good idea if you have an opportunity to send that out ahead of time. But of course, it has been my experience that most team members at a veteran meeting want to feel their treasurer's report in their hand. They want a hard copy. But the current thought is to move those financial reports to the end of the meeting so that you do not get bogged down at the very beginning of the meeting going through, really, again, what amounts to history. And finally, at the bottom of the agenda, sometimes a good idea just to list all of the upcoming calendar dates that you will want your team members to participate in, and also calendar dates that they can share with other members and constituents in their congregation. I think that's what I'm saying. Any questions? Let me move on. Yeah, treasurers like to read their reports. Yes. But again, that's a history statement. Any questions or comments before we move into the next section? Now I want to talk to you just a little bit about focusing on results. This is one model, the SMART model. Many of you have probably heard about or have at least had some exposure to this model, the SMART model. Setting very specific goals that are measurable. Assigning those actions out, making the goals realistic and achievable, and then having them time-bound. So this is one model, the SMART model. Some of you may remember years ago there was a model out called MBOs, Management by Objectives. This Management by Objectives method is a much more detailed method to focus on results, and it requires a great deal of thought and planning. But the Management by Objectives method is simply this. The team identifies what their goals are. And then the team identifies under each goal what objectives are necessary to achieve a particular goal. And aside each objective, there's a person or a group assigned or a sub-team assigned, and there's a time identified with that. The idea around management by objectives in that format is the events are then sequence. So you know what has to happen before the next event happens. So that's just another model to focus on results. Are there other models out there that anyone wants to share in terms of how a team can focus on its results that maybe you use in your congregation or in your organization? Okay, well, very good. But those are two models that I would give you as the SMART model and the management by objective model for establishing your goals and achieving your goals and focusing on your results. And here, too, it's important to have this written down so that you can track how you're progressing and how you're moving along. And really, these areas of focus, regardless of which model you use, that serves as a way of tracking inside your vestry meeting of how we're doing, how we're making progress. Visit year-end results against the plan. Rob, yes, exactly. Let's go. Focus on results. Establish regular feedback loops is what Rob just suggested in the bottom chat box. How are we doing? How do we monitor how we're doing as a group, how we're doing as an individual? How do we monitor that? On the screen, you'll see some of the suggested questions that you might just ask on a regular basis as you have the opportunity in your vestry meetings or in your group meetings. How are we doing as a team? You know, are we following? Are we on track with our norms? This is a wonderful question I use a lot. What's going well? You know, where do we need to improve? You know, the more we can get feedback and the more we can ask for feedback, it goes back to that other question of conflict. You know, if we're monitoring this on an ongoing basis, we can reduce our level of conflict, we can reduce our level of stress, and we certainly can keep an eye on how we're moving forward and how we're achieving our goals. Are there some other suggested questions you might add to that list? Anybody out there?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Okay, any questions on the three processes that we've identified? Or anything that you might add?
Ron, this is Miguel. I might add just one thing, and if you don't mind, I'm going to just go back to one of the earlier slides. Okay.
Sure.
I think that when we talk about the three ingredients for vital teams, what this model comes from a variety of places, but basically what it's presented as oftentimes as dysfunction. A functional team is operating on all three cylinders here in strong relationships, clear processes, and focus on results. And a dysfunctional team is frequently missing one or two of these areas. And that's been really helpful for me personally whenever I help to adhere at ECF. I lead a team of we're 7 total. And whenever it starts to get a little rough, I've found it personally very helpful to go back to these three ingredients, these three kind of pillars, and ask where are we getting a little weak on? Has it been a long time since we've actually, met as a group or an in-person group and built our relationships? Are we getting a little bit messy in the way in which we're meeting, or in how our meetings are? Am I not paying attention to the agendas as much, and we're kind of going too long, or things like that? Or are we getting too unfocused on, or we're getting focused on other areas and we've sort of forgotten our goals, our annual goals? And I've just found this to be a very helpful model, personally, in the sense of it's a very short checklist, and periodically, and there's oftentimes one area that's pretty easily identifiable that needs some strengthening, and so that's sort of partly also why we're showing this here.
Well, two things I want to add to that, Miguel. When Miguel was talking about his team, I'm a member of that team where he supervises and manages 7 of us. But one of the things that we do very well, Miguel, I think, is just the check-ins that you have. That Miguel sets up a check-in with each of his team members once a month every 6 weeks or so, where we just have an opportunity to check in with Miguel individually to tell him what's going well, where we need support, and to get feedback. So that's one thing that comes to mind when you mention that. So I thank you for sharing that to Miguel. Also, when we talk about these ingredients for vital teams, and we were talking about the agenda and all of that, one thing I failed to mention is that it's always a good idea, I think, to have your mission statement and your vision statement identified on your agenda, and even perhaps on your meeting minutes. This will help to keep the team always focused on are the things that we're discussing in our meeting, in our vestry meetings, in our various meetings, consistent with the mission and vision that we've outlined as an organization together. And this also serves well for even some of the subordinate teams, the stewardship team, as Peter mentioned. The work that we're doing with stewardship is consistent with what we have established as a congregation in terms of vision and mission. Other thoughts? Thank you for that, Miguel. Richard and Laura is typing, so I'm going to wait just a few moments. I'll give them just a few more moments, Lori and Richard. Are typing. Richard says in one community that he was a part of, we would read our shared value statements as a kind of credo statement at the beginning of every meeting. What a wonderful idea. What a wonderful idea. That could be right there, Richard, at the beginning of the meeting, right after the opening prayer. Mm-hmm. Lori, has anyone had experience with using ministry clusters to keep things advancing between vestry meetings? If so, what are the pros and cons? So Lori is asking about ministry clusters. Say more about that, Lori. Does everyone understand what ministry clusters are, or ministry teams? That's what I mentioned earlier, Lori, when we were talking about vital teams, types of vital teams, when I spoke about an oversight team. When we were talking about these teams, that's an oversight committee or oversight team as it functions in my church. I will tell you one of the cons of that type of arrangement is the process is slow because it is a collaborative ministry process. So it does slow down the process. That's one con, I would say. Certainly the pro is that everyone is involved in the ministry. Everyone is participating. Everyone is being heard. Ideals are being shared. So that's a pro and a con on both sides of the ministry cluster. The other con is on the ministry cluster teams is that you can oftentimes get a few runaways, like a runaway train. Folks will run away because you are providing an opportunity for people to come into the conversation and giving more latitude for people to participate. Sandy, we are working on ministry. Oh, I missed you. Just one second. I want to go back to Sandy's comment up here. We are working on ministry clusters. Just moved in that direction about 5 months ago, and so far we are happy with the direction it's going. Yes, Lori writes, instead of having one person, yes, indeed, for outreach, perhaps there's 3 members. I always say, Lori, that's a great comment because, when we work together as a team, we all succeed together or fail together. No one carries that responsibility individually. And as the saying goes, 3 minds are better than one. This process also requires more. It requires more. But that's what we're advocating for at Vital Teams is best, both at the vestry level, but throughout the organization, collaborative ministry. And that works into these ministry teams that Sandy is speaking about. Sandy, thank you so much for sharing that because that is such an important part of what we're advocating for in terms of collaborative ministry and leadership teams. I'm going to go to this is my last slide really I have for you tonight, and I just want you to think about some areas that we discussed tonight that might help you improve in your vital team in your parish over the next 6 months. In strong relationships, we talked about beginning meetings. Peter suggested Bible study. We talked about meditations. We talked about perhaps poems. Someone just wrote a few moments ago, which I think is an excellent idea that I might start in mine, is having the team go through the vision and mission statement right after the prayer or right after the meditation. What a wonderful way to get folks rallied around. But those are some ideas around strong relationships. The retreats, we can't say enough of how important retreats are. So maybe if you're not doing those, you might consider that or taking it back to the congregation and your team and talking about what a retreat might look like. And then we talked about those 4 phases of development. Remember, forming, storming, norming, and results, hitting the results. I think as we talked about, certainly for a meeting to run well, it all centers around that agenda. And I also want you all to think about what I said earlier in terms of that rolling agenda. As things come up to the parish or things come up to a particular team, put them on the agenda and identify them. We do that. That's how Miguel runs our team, is every week, all of the work that's in front of us is identified on the agenda. Sometimes we don't speak to it all, but we know what's in front of us. And through Miguel's work in terms of leading us, he'll point to what areas we need to focus on in a particular meeting. But we know the body of work that's in front of us with that rolling agenda. And lastly, this whole area, think about what type of um, models you're using currently, and what type of models you may want to adopt in terms of how do you focus on your results? How do you create a feedback loop so that you can monitor how you're performing, both at the group level and at the individual level? And then think about it, as some of you wrote a few moments ago, how do we deal with conflict in our groups and manage that? And how do we keep the group on track? So those are just some of the things I wanted to share, and I want you to think about where you might go in the next 6 months. And if anybody wants to share, please feel free to do so. If there's anything that we talked about tonight that might be helpful to your group and how you might proceed to go forward. Richard is typing.
And
this process also requires more, yes, I'm sorry.
And I see that several people are live in terms of their microphones are on. Richard, for instance, yours is live. So if we're sort of at a point where if you'd like to also speak, please feel free. If anyone would also like to call in, or we can try to turn on your microphone, or there's a raise my hand. There's a little button to raise your hand, and it's right above where the green arrow is now. So just let us know how you'd like to participate.
I'm sorry, there we go. We got a bunch of stuff down here. Leah, we call them working groups, yes? Leah's responding to, and I'm sorry I didn't pick up her note earlier, but she's responding to the ministry clusters. We keep them small, and there's one vestry member to report back to the Wonderful. That works, Leah, in terms of the vestry. One of the things, most of us in our vestries, we have standing committees of the vestry, which would include what Peter mentioned perhaps a few moments ago, stewardship and outreach, some of the standing committees. Then there are those subcommittees that are not directly related to the vestry. Richard writes, we ensure that anyone who is anchoring a task or project is in the reporting loop. Yes. Canadian for vestry. Yes.
I was using the term church committee, which is Canadian for what you call vestry.
Okay, very good. Church committee, yes. Thank you for that, Richard. Yeah, and that's important to have them in the loop, and certainly, and one of the presentations we do here at ECF and one of the training webinars that we do, and it's certainly part of our 101 curriculum, is we get into vestries. And I think it's always important to focus on what the vestry is really responsible for versus where committee work is done. The example I would give you is that my vestry does the work of all of the temporal affairs, as many of your groups, but all of our project planning and program planning is all done outside of the vestry group by the oversight team. I do not participate at a very high level in terms of planning programs and projects in the parish. I am just one of many members that sit around the table and provide my ideas, but it is the oversight team that actually plans the programs and projects. Oftentimes in vestry meetings, we get bogged down with that type of work too, right? Programs and project planning. I see Richard wrote, retreats for sure and smart method. Thank you so much, Richard. Richard added 2 areas that he's going to focus on in the next 6 months, and those are retreats and the SMART method that we talked about. Thank you for that, Richard, and good luck, and let us know how we might be able to support you in that.
Ron, Richard also has his hand raised just to make a comment.
Sure.
Not so much a comment, but a quick question. How do you train people to only spend an hour and a half and stay within either an hour and a half or 2 hours and maintain those limits? How do you help people get used to that idea?
And certainly what you're speaking of is that, of course, meetings can go over. That speaks to what I mentioned a few moments ago, Richard, with regard to the rolling agenda. Um, the items are going to stay there. We're going to still address them. But tonight, what are the most important things that we take care of? And so we know that there's always plenty of business for the vestry, or plenty of business for a group to dispose of. But what are the important priorities tonight? I think one of the issues around, at least has been my experience around vestry members, and even maintaining decorum, is that meetings run too long. Our attention span is such that we come and we want to focus on those things that we can get to in 90 minutes. There will always be another vestry meeting. There will always be another conversation. But I think if I was to pick out one of the most important norms that I would have, and we have it in our church, is we start on time and we end on time. Because then everybody has a 90-minute committed to that vestry meeting. So I share that with you. So that's how to let people know we're only going to meet for 90 minutes. We're going to start on time. We're going to finish on time. We're going to take care of the important parts of our agenda tonight, and the other matters can continue to roll. One other comment I would make to you, Richard, is some of the team members tonight, some of the participants tonight have mentioned over and over again, was certainly the sharing of reports ahead of time. Sending your reports out ahead of time. And again, the question there is the only time we address a report is that if there's a concern with a report that was sent out or it requires an action by the team. Peter, your question is, are there courses or ideals? I think that, are you speaking of ECF courses? Is that what I'm hearing? If that's the case, let me wait and see, make sure I'm answering the correct question here.
Anything.
What you say, Miguel?
Oh, no, I was just reading Peter's response. Is anything, is there anything, basically? He responded to your question.
Yes.
Yeah, are there courses or ideas of how to run leadership training programs for a church? Curriculum would be welcome too. I mean, I would begin, well, I'm not sure I would begin, but I think that we have right now the slides for this presentation, for instance, are downloadable, and they're if you see where the green arrow is there, just to the left of it, you can download these slides. It may be helpful to take this presentation itself and have a conversation with your vestry about which of the areas do you feel that, does the vestry feel that they need to do some work on, and really focus on that area. We were at ECF was recently doing some work with a congregation, shall go nameless, of course, but a very high level, high steeple congregation that on many, many different levels you can think is functioning very, very well. And at one point, a vestry member just said, but, we don't actually, we actually have never actually spoken to one another. We really don't even know who's in the room. And, we don't know even what our purpose is here. And it was really a remarkable moment because I think it spoke to the fact that as successful in many different respects as the congregation was, they really had a lot of relationship work to do. And so, I think any vestry is going to have a place that's maybe a little bit weaker, and finding that and spending a little bit of time focusing on that would be helpful. So I hope that would at least help you start the conversation.
And Miguel, I know that one of the things that I just want to share, as I said, we have put together a 101 curriculum that addresses all of this in much greater detail. One of the things that, and I know that will be made available at some point to the wider church, but you can dig down deeper between a lot of these areas. But as Miguel said, you can begin these conversations with your vestries or with your teams out there. I just want to respond to what Lee said here, her question, her statement there, you know, that word committee is an old word. I agree with you. We use the word team in our parish. I heard the word cluster churches or cluster groups used as well. So yeah, that word committee reminds me of you know, folks sitting around the table and not really focusing on these areas. It's really a team effort versus. So yes, the word committee is seldom used now. More folks are moving to work teams. What else do we have here? Sandy, we are going to work on closing feedback loops. So that's one thing Sandy said she can will take away from this, is they're going to work on closing the feedback loop. So important to have the group talk about on a regular basis and to become comfortable, because then it's not criticism, but it's collaboration. And so when we can close that loop, Sandy, you're absolutely right. Lee writes, use of the parking lot has always come back to us, has been relegated there. Yes, the parking lot. Everybody understands the parking lot method, where we put ideas and thoughts, perhaps on a piece of newsprint, and parking lot them until we can come back to them, but keeping them in front of us so we can talk to them. Nancy writes, we shape our agenda this month, next month, 6 months. Very good. And Peter, anything? Next 6 months? Okay. Yeah. All right. I think we're there. God bless and Merry Christmas. I think Nancy puts us out there. Thank you all. On your screen are some additional resources. I'm going to ask Miguel to leave that up as we close. But blessings to you all. And again, thank you for joining. And please, as the opportunity arises, go to the ECF website, where there's a number of resources in various areas that can help you not only in team building, but in certainly running effective meetings and in other areas. But please do take an opportunity to visit that. God blessings to you all, and Merry Christmas to you all, and to you all a good night.
Good night.
Be well. See you later, Peter. Be well.
Blessings.